what's up? Hello, my name is Emma, and today I am finally going to be giving you guys my review of the film To the Bone. I have been getting so many requests to review this film even before the movie came out, but I knew I wanted to talk about it on my new channel, so here we finally are. If you did not know, To the Bone is a film that came out this past July. It is directed by Marty Noxton, and it stars Lily Collins, and it is all about this girl who is dealing with an eating disorder. She has been in and out of treatment centers for years now, and she's really at her breaking point with her eating disorder and her family. So she ends up entering this new treatment center with this doctor that has these unconventional methods, and it's basically about her experience after starting treatment there. There's a few things I want to go over and give you some non-spoiler thoughts before I jump into the spoiler discussion of this video, which is going to be really long. A big misconception about this movie is that Netflix made it. They did not. It was premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. Netflix bought it afterwards. They had nothing to do with the production of this film. Additionally, the lead actress and the director have both suffered from eating disorders in the past, and I know their research for this film went beyond their own personal experiences, as they also met with places like the LA Clinic for Eating Disorders, and they consulted doctors and psychologists and nutritionists and whatnot. So I do think this is probably one of the most authentic portrayals we have ever gotten and may ever get in regards to eating disorder, because it's really important that we have someone behind the camera and in front of it that really knows what they're talking about. There was so much controversy when the trailer for this film dropped because it definitely has some graphic imagery. The trailer didn't have a trigger warning beforehand, and a lot of people thought that it was going to romanticize or glamorize eating disorders. As for my personal opinion on this movie, I watched it twice. The first time I had some more negative feelings about it, which I'll talk about in the spoiler section, but the second time I ended up really enjoying it. As somebody who has been in recovery from anorexia for the past 6 years, I do believe that this is a really authentic portrayal of what it is like to have anorexia. There's so many points in this film that you just you don't get and you wouldn't put into the film unless you truly know what this experience is like. So it was really important to me to see so much of my own experience and the experience of so many other people accurately portrayed on screen. I had some issues with that first rewatch because I really thought that it just wasn't focused enough on recovery, and it was like the same story I've seen a million times about a white girl who has anorexia, who is middle class, and she's sent off to a treatment center, and then just right at the end of the film she gets better. But throughout my second watch there was definitely more positives than negatives than I felt. As for negatives, the one big takeaway of negative that I didn't like is I think mental health professionals are grossly misrepresented in this film, and I was super unhappy with the main doctor. But that really concludes the non-spoiler section of this video, so if you haven't watched To the Bone and you feel like it's something that you can handle, something you want to form your own opinion on, definitely go watch it and come back. Otherwise, we are going to be talking about this film now, and just as a warning, if you cannot already assume, this video is going to include a trigger warning for eating disorders, specifically anorexia, as I am going to talk about my personal experience in relation to this film and specific eating disorder imagery associated with it. So first off, I am really pleased that they did have a trigger warning at the very beginning of this film. That is essential to me in a film that is going to have so much graphic imagery like this, so I was pleased it was there right off the bat. Another thing I loved about the beginning, and we're just starting right off with the authentic portrayal of eating disorders, is when Eli is in the car, the shots out the window are focused on things like My Fit Foods and Taco Bell. As someone who has dealt with an eating disorder for almost half my life at this point, that is what I see when I drive. I may be in recovery and I may be doing good, but when I drive, it's basically like everything else on the street is blurred and in motion, whereas all of the food places like grocery stores and fast food restaurants and such are just completely in focus, and it's the only thing I can think about, especially when I'm relapsing and I'm really in that mindset. That is the only thing I can see. And so having those targeted images, which some people might just pass over while watching if they didn't really know the significance of it, it's a really significant part of the film, and I loved seeing that represented because I never knew that other people saw things in that way like myself. So we're gonna jump right into talking about the humor in this movie, because it is very dark and inappropriate, and there's a lot of things that are said that should not be condoned. For example, in the beginning, Ellen's sister tells her that she has calorie Asperger's. We have the moment where Eli and Luke go out to a restaurant and they pretend to have cancer so that they can get sympathy and have alcohol. We have the one character who says to Dr. Beckham, "Are you trying to turn me straight?" That's a different program, which is obviously making light of conversion therapy. I definitely think all of these are really offensive and inappropriate jokes. They're definitely not things that I would encourage people to say, but I will say from personal experience, a lot of people who do experience eating disorders, you know, we become different people when we're in that mindset. And I know for a fact that there are jokes that I make or things that I say or things that I do when I am in my eating disorder mindset that I wouldn't normally do, and it borders on these inappropriate, offensive things. Again, it's something that is very true to people's eating disorder experience, but I do want to mention it and say that this isn't stuff that I would condone saying. The one thing that really pissed me off is when they called Emma Stone fat, because I cannot compliment the attack, the personal attack on a real person who might see this movie, commenting on their appearance in a film about eating disorders. It was just wildly inappropriate and not at the level of my personal understanding. I think it was so wrong of them to include a real person in that. But overall, I understand the dark humor because it is a real thing, but I think it's important that we talk about the fact that these things are not appropriate to say. So let's also talk about Lily Collins losing weight for this role, which was another huge controversial element of To the Bone. As I mentioned, Lily Collins herself has had an eating disorder, and although I can't comment on her personal recovery, I can't tell you how well she's been doing for the last few years. She has maintained a healthy weight in the past, but she definitely lost significant weight for this role. To my understanding of the research I had done when I was interning at NIDA and they were like, what do we say about this? I found that she apparently wasn't required to lose weight for the role, and it was something that she wanted to do to make her character more authentic. She did it in the hands of nutritionists and a lot of other women that were very supportive of her, and she gained the weight back after. I don't really know how to feel about this. I don't really know how I feel about this. I'm not going to make claims that it was psychologically damaging for Lily to do, because that is only something that she is going to know. I just hope that she's doing well now. I understand why it would be concerning for a lot of people, especially mental health professionals, because we should never really encourage people with eating disorders to lose weight. I just don't really like the narrative that people with eating disorders are never going to be able to change their body to be happy with themselves in the future. I personally find that more damaging than allowing somebody with an eating disorder to experiment with this for a role in a controlled environment. To me, those generalizations sound like I am confined to one way of life as somebody who is recovering from an eating disorder, and I don't want to change myself now, but I want to think that in the future I will be recovered enough to do so in a healthy manner. So I'm hoping for Lily's well-being. That's all I can really say about this. I want her to be of peace of mind and to be healthy at the moment and to be happy and confident. That's all I can really say about it, is that I just hope she's doing well now. I don't really have an opinion on whether it was the wrong thing to do or whether it was bad for Lily or whatnot, because that's only something she can really decide for herself. Related to the dark humor in this film, there is also an awful lot of stigma coming from Ellen's stepmother. She makes it known that Ellen's mother has breakdowns as a result of her bipolar disorder, and that makes her an unstable parent, and she says that the reason that Ellen has an eating disorder is because her mother came out as a lesbian when she was so young, and she feels like she doesn't deserve to eat as a result of that. So with the dark humor and this stigma related to mental illness and the LGBTQ+ community, I do feel like the overall tone of this movie is produced in a way that we know that what they're saying should not be condoned. These are not okay things to say, and this isn't the attitude you should come away from this film with. I think the way it is portrayed on film was enough to challenge these ideals, to say that this is not okay. I don't think we necessarily needed a character in every moment to say, this is not okay, you should not say this about people, because the tone of the scene really came through and showed that. So throughout the movie, there was a little bit of accurate medical information about anorexia shown throughout the movie. For example, Ellen experiences amenorrhea, which is the loss of your period as a result of a low body mass. In the very beginning, we highlight on the fact that she has lanugo, which is the sort of fur our bodies grow when we do not have the body fat to warm ourselves. And as we'll talk about later with Megan's miscarriage, she's not able to support a baby because of her weight, which can happen very frequently as well. So I would have liked a little bit more to make it like more medically accurate, to be a little bit more informative in that respect, but I was still pleased that there were little tidbits in there to show that it was a well-researched movie. So from the very first meeting of Ellen with Dr. Beckham, I did not like him. I just think he is way too harsh with his patients, and not in a really tough love sort of way, in the way that he says, I'm not going to help you if you're not interested in living. That's that's true. Doctors can't help you if you have no motivation and put in no effort to your recovery. It does have to be something that comes from the patient, but there is such a nicer way to say that. Like, it just feels like a very hostile environment. Like, Ellen isn't allowed to have her own thoughts and everything has to be Dr. Beckham's way. So I just really didn't like that first interaction. He says that you're on your own, which again is true. You have to recover on your own, but it just doesn't feel like he's laying a supportive foundation for her to be on her own. It's basically like he's throwing her out the door and saying, you can do it yourself. And also I didn't like the fact that he was like, we don't talk about food. What I have learned as a psychology student is a lot of specifically neurotypical doctors love to say that eating disorders are solely rooted in the fact that the person has a desire for control in their life, so they control their food, or else something like they have like daddy issues. And I definitely think that Dr. Beckham is one of those doctors, because a lot of people's eating disorders are rooted in body image and food. For example, with me, my eating disorder is 100% dependent on how I feel about myself and my eating. I do not relapse when I feel out of control or overwhelmed in my life and I need something to control. I relapse when I'm feeling bad about myself or I'm having trouble with my eating. And I think saying we cannot talk about food just takes away a crucial part of the eating disorder recovery process, because it really is a huge aspect. Whether you feel that this disorder is rooted in something else, it comes through food and it's something that needs to be talked about. I don't like Dr. Beckham and we're gonna talk more about him later. One moment that I'm conflicted on, because it's super funny but it's also really sad, is when Ellen's mother brings out the Eat Up Ellen burger cake, because you know that it is like a nice, like, she had good intentions with it. It was supposed to be funny about her going to eating disorder recovery, but it obviously, like, again, with the tone of the scene, you see that this is totally inappropriate and not helpful whatsoever. I just think it really well represents a lot of the family members and loved ones who have people with eating disorders in their lives, because a lot of times they have good intentions and they want to do things and make light of it and they want to make the person feel better, but it is a lot of times potentially very harmful. For me, I really associated that with the people who say, oh, you're looking so healthy, and they think that that's supposed to be encouraging, but for a lot of people that is an immensely triggering thing for them to say. So I think it just really highlights the ignorance of people who have people with eating disorders in their lives and how that can come across as really insensitive and harmful. One quick moment that really struck me is when Pearl is sitting there and she is talking about the IV fluid, which Eli just told her how many calories there are in, and she's crying and she's just like, it's just hard getting better. And you know that, like, in that moment you can see she really wants to get better, but it is just so hard. And I think that is the motto of eating disorder recovery. It's just hard getting better, and it was just a really emotional moment that I enjoyed seeing. I also liked how in that sort of group therapy session they talk about how eating disorders are very similar to addictions. You get addicted to food, you get addicted to exercise, you get addicted to the gratification that comes from partaking in those behaviors. I think a lot of people don't see eating disorders as an addiction, but there are so many addictive parts of it that was really important to highlight. And again, with the group therapy session, I think these were personally the most beneficial parts of the whole story. Dr. Beckham just didn't need to be there, because those group therapy sessions when the rest of the residents were just interacting together, so much more helpful. A really crucial moment to me that really sparks what I believe is the beginning of Ellen's true recovery is when she says, it's a struggle accepting that I have to be here, and the person who is running the session says, maybe your victory is that you are here. I feel like this film doesn't necessarily have the most uplifting lines because so much of it is dark and heavy, but I think that is a really great thing to talk about in regards to eating disorder recovery. It is a struggle, it is really hard, but just the fact that you're trying and you're attempting and you're making efforts is really a victory within itself. One thing that I really liked about the trailer just right off the bat that I think a lot of people overlooked is that the entire household, all of the residents, had completely different body types, so it wasn't like there was only one vision of an eating disorder. We have people dealing with anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, and there also was at least one person of color, and I believe they also potentially might have belonged to the LGBT community based on that conversion therapy joke. So I was really excited about the diversity in this movie just going forward, but unfortunately I feel like none of the characters got development. I was so ready to be like, look at this film, it's so diverse in the way that it portrays eating disorders, and the only people that got any development was Eli and Luke and a little bit of Megan, and that was it. All the other characters, literally no freaking development. That was personally a really disappointing takeaway from this film, is that it was not as diverse as I wanted it to be. The family therapy scene was a tough one to watch. I cried throughout so much of that scene just because it was really, really heavy. There's so many fights and tears and arguments, and the family really makes it about them as opposed to Ellen, which I think was really the intention of it. The whole scene is really just the stepmom and the mother fighting without them really asking Ellen for feedback, and this is like the one time that I feel Dr. Beckham actually does his job, because he tries to center the discussion on Ellen because that's what they're here for. But the one thing I really did love about that scene is when Ellen's sister is talking about how Ellen's eating disorder has affected her, and she's not making it about her, but she's talking about her experience, which I think was the most appropriate response in this situation. It was just so hard watching her talk about, like, you know, I go back on my prom photos and I think Ellen was in the hospital, that's why she's not here, or that was the time Ellen fainted on the bus. Like, you know, just seeing her pain in relation to how much she loves her sister and how hurtful it is to watch her suffer. It was a really powerful moment. And of course we have the perfect line from Ellen where she says, "I'm sorry, I'm not a person, I'm a problem," which I think really captures how the family views her having her eating disorder. And it's a shame and it's really, really sad, but that is how it is for some people. And I think that sort of family dynamic is important to show because it does have a serious effect on eating disorder recovery. Also, am I the only one that picked up on how weird it was that they had characters named Anna and Mia, which is often used as short for anorexia and bulimia? Like, it was just a little cringy. I did really like the storyline of Megan and her baby. I'm so sad and heartbroken that she miscarried. I was crying so hard in that scene. It was so heartbreaking, and then she left, and we really don't know where her story goes from there. But in the moments of her talking about how, like, she wants to get better for this baby and she has a purpose, like, it was really warming because, you know, you were really rooting for her and you wanted her to do great and for it to carry to term. And it's such a shame that it happened, but it does happen in real life. And that's another thing that I feel like isn't talked about a lot, is the sterility and the miscarriages that happen with people who deal with eating disorders. It is an epidemic, honestly, and I'm really glad they brought attention to that. Oh, a scene I loved is when Luke brings out the goo cluster for Ellen to eat while they're watching TV, and like they're playing around at first and she's like, ha ha ha, you're weird, like, no, stop it, I don't want to, I can't, and then she just screams, like, back off. I loved that Ellen did not take the bite of that goo goo cluster and stood up for herself. That definitely needed to be a moment of recovery for herself that she decided to do when she was ready, and I'm so happy it actually followed through in the film and she sat down to dinner one night with a goo goo cluster and ate it. My girl. I'm not a huge fan of Luke's character, but in that scene particularly, he was infuriating because he was so pushy and he just didn't understand that that is something that Ellen had to do herself, and I'm just so happy that she powered through it and did it when she was ready, and she made that little progress totally on her own. Now with Eli and Luke, I do think they have an interesting dynamic. I think they have a good friendship blooming, but I don't think there's any romantic chemistry whatsoever. For example, I really liked the scene where they were just talking in Luke's room and Luke is talking about his dancing career and Ellen is talking about herself and how she came to be here, but then like he just ruins it being weird talking about sex and stuff, and it's like, this was so unnecessary. And this scene where they kiss is just very, very uncomfortable because Ellen just like was not really into it, and he's just saying that he's in love with her, and then he gets angry at her for standing up for herself and being truthful, and it was honestly just a mess. I feel like when it comes to the romance, Luke is just obsessed with this idea that he has of who Eli is, and he just like won't allow her to be herself, and he wants her to be like this Tumblr artist that he has admired from afar for so long. And like, I think they had a cute friendship blooming, but I just don't see them complimenting each other romantically whatsoever. It was really unnecessary. I think the movie really could have been so much more if they didn't have to include a romance in it. I definitely don't think it romanticized eating disorders. A lot of people use that word and they don't understand the meaning of it. They didn't romanticize eating disorders. It wasn't like a savior complex sort of theme that was going on. It was just unnecessary and didn't really add anything to the story. I have some mixed feelings on the rain scene because I think as a movie it looked fantastic. The cinematography, the song, everything about that scene was perfect. but I have no idea what it had to do with eating disorder recovery. It felt very stereotypical Hollywood, like, look at me, I'm cleansing myself of all of my troubles with this water and the rain, and you know that's always what rain represents in big Hollywood films, but it just didn't feel like it had any substantial sort of influence on eating disorder recovery. It just seemed like a cheap scene to throw in there because it looked cool. I don't know, man. They keep talking about Dr. Beckham's really successful unconventional techniques, but I just don't see anything helpful in anything he does. I will say, my second time watching, I did start to see the relationship between therapist and client forming between Eli and Dr. Beckham, and I really thought it was getting somewhere. Each time they speak, Eli becomes more and more open to talking about herself, and that's a strong sign of recovery. I think the first time around, I was just really bitter about the fact that this movie wasn't the movie I wanted it to be. I really wanted this film to have a timeline where Eli enters this treatment center, and from there, it is an upward incline. Obviously, there has to be some setbacks, and she has to struggle a little bit, but I wanted the overall theme of this movie to be recovery, and unfortunately it did sort of follow the same template of all of the eating disorder media that I've seen in the past, where like the girl hits rock bottom and then she decides to recover at the very end of the film and we don't see anything after that. It's definitely so different from a lot of eating disorder movies that already exist, but in the aspect of like the recovery timeline, it did follow the similar template that I've seen a million times, so I was upset about that in my first watch, but the second time around, I really started to notice Eli's small progresses so much more. You know, like in the scene with the Goo Goo Cluster, and when she starts to open up to Dr. Beckham, like there were a lot of strong signs of recovery that I really missed my first time around because I had an expectation that wasn't following through, and I sort of blinded myself to all of the positives of the film, where I now believe that this film does hold some significant points of recovery for Eli that should be recognized and highlighted. So I will say, as someone who has been a part of the eating disorder community for quite a long time, Rexy is a very outdated term in my opinion for people with anorexia. So it was evident to me that the director of this film definitely knew what she was talking about. Like, that's probably a term from her generation of people who were dealing with anorexia. It's not very current, and it sort of felt out of place when they were talking about things like the Tumblr community of people who are dealing with eating disorders and Eli's artwork. Like, it just didn't really fit, and it dated the film a little bit. So after Megan miscarries and after she leaves the treatment center, Eli starts to regress very, very quickly. And this is really the point where I started to truly hate Dr. Beckham. So Eli has a session with Dr. Beckham about where she is in her recovery right now, and he essentially says her response to Megan leaving is cowardly and childish and that she needs to grow a pair. I love that Eli did not take that. Like, I have so much respect for that girl for being like, you're a dick and this is not how you treat people. But I found that so wildly inappropriate. Like, I was shocked watching it because I could not believe that they would put someone who is meant to represent a mental health professional to say grow a pair to someone in recovery for their mental health issues. Dr. Beckham is a truly disgusting portrayal of what a mental health professional is truly like. Any mental health professional I have come in contact with, and the one that I hope to be in the future, is very supportive and empathetic and understanding and allows the person to feel something, whereas Dr. Beckham does not allow Eli to think or feel any way if it does not align with his ideology. He is just so dismissive and completely invalidates her feelings, and I'm really appalled at that scene. Like, that is not what people who work in the eating disorder community are like. I don't know if the director did have a bad doctor herself in the past and she was relaying on her own experience, because it is sort of semi-autobiographical, I believe. But I was so appalled that that was how they decided to portray mental health professionals. But what upsets me even more is that I think it would have been fine if he was like this really shitty doctor that didn't help Ellen whatsoever and was completely dismissive, and she left him and like it was made very clear that this is not how mental health professionals are. But what really got me is that she goes back to the same treatment center at the very end. He still is revered as this amazing doctor who has this high success rate, and even now, look, Ellen is starting recovery again, and it's because of what he did, and I'm so pissed that what he did and the things that he has said and the betrayal that we have of this doctor is continuing to be condoned. And I get his whole slogan for his treatment are that it's unconventional, but it's just such a shame that his behavior and his actions are totally passed over and we're left with this ultimate decision that this is what works. Maybe I'm super sensitive because I'm going into the mental health counseling field, but I'm just really, really upset at the portrayal of Dr. Beckham. I think that is my least favorite thing about this movie and my biggest critique. So the mother-daughter scene where Eli is back at her mother's house and they're in the tent and Eli's mother starts feeding her and cradling her with a bottle. First time around, I was like, this is really weird. I don't get it. Second time around though, I think I like read Marty Noxon talking about it where it's really supposed to be Eli's mother sort of like reclaiming the motherhood role in Eli's life, and it was supposed to be a moment of bonding between the two of them. So I think at surface it was really meant to be sort of unsettling and unconventional and weird, but I think the overall purpose of that scene really did shine through in the end. Unlike the family therapy session in the beginning where Ellen's family does make her eating disorder about themselves, I feel like this is a stronger moment in how families can react to eating disorder recovery of a loved one. So as someone who's dealt with an eating disorder watching this movie, I didn't feel particularly triggered by most of it. A lot of other people did, and their experiences were totally valid, and I hope they're doing okay now. I personally did not feel triggered by any moment in this movie, but the one scene that really shocked me is at the very end where Ellen is lying naked on the floor and she's looking at herself sort of like an out-of-body experience to say, this is what I look like. That might be a good scene for people without eating disorders who are watching this movie to see what it really is like. For me personally, it wasn't that I was triggered by it, I could not watch it because it was so painful to see. So for the ending, essentially Eli wakes up from almost dying in the desert as a result of her eating disorder, and she goes back to the same treatment center, and we're left to assume that like this is the real starting point for her recovery, and it's kind of implied that she does get better from there. I just wish we had more than like 2 minutes of her really committing to recovery, because that's the trope that falls into every other piece of eating disorder media that almost exists entirely. Like I said, with my second rewatch, I did identify so many more positive scenes related to Eli's recovery where she was making true progress, but I just wish we had more at the end of the film and it didn't just cut right off when she like really decides to get help, because I feel like that's the significant moment that should have happened way earlier in the film. You know, if there had to be a massive relapse, I wish it occurred earlier in the film so that we had the rest of the film to really see her getting better, because at this point we're just left to assume, and I just think it would have been so much more powerful to truly see someone getting better on a stable path to recovery as opposed to just assuming that they do once the film ends. Also, as a final thought, I vehemently believe that Dr. Beckham deserved consequences for his actions. I really think he should have lost his license. I think he should have lost his practice. He is not a good mental health professional, and he does not deserve to continue treating these people. And I'm particularly upset that Eli sought treatment at the same exact treatment center after Dr. Beckham had treated her so horribly. I get that the whole point of this film was the unconventional residency for people with eating disorders, but it was just so disappointing for her to go through all of that, to be in that almost toxic and hostile environment for eating disorder recovery and return to the same place, because I don't think it helped her very much, and I think she would have benefited in a different program. So that really concludes all of my thoughts on To the Bone. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. I know it has been long awaited for a lot of you who know me from my booktube channel, but I feel very passionately about this movie after watching it, and I think overall I am pleased and it fulfilled most of my expectations. There's definitely problems with it. It's not perfect, but I do think that there's a lot of points in this film that are very important for the public to see in regards to the experience of having an eating disorder. Favorite thing is the authenticity. Least favorite thing is the portrayal of mental health professionals. I will never get over that. I do know this movie came out months ago and this is a very delayed review, and a lot of you probably don't remember a lot of significant moments of it, but definitely let me know your thoughts on To the Bone below, because I would love to discuss it with you. But that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you soon for a new one. Bye!